Hello and welcome to another episode of Teaching Heroes, the teaching podcast where I talk to teachers and educators and ask them, what does it take to show up and train tomorrow's leaders? And today I have an incredible guest. I have the amazing Felicity Furey, engineer, educator and entrepreneur. Felicity, thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, so it's great. We're going to talk about STEM in education today and all the things that surround that. And it's just so great to have you on to talk about that. So even though I'm an arts person at heart, I do very much appreciate, STEM education, and really, we do really have to build the profile of women in STEM. So tell us a little bit about what you do, Felicity, and I know you just do so much, so that could take the whole podcast. So try and, just give us a brief indication.
I've realised I'm really bad with introductions when people say, working events, what do you do? And then I think, lots. Where do I
start?
So I think, as you said earlier, engineer, entrepreneur, educator are kind of the three words that I go to. So I have a few different gigs at the moment. One of them is as an engineer in residence at Swinburne University. And my role there is connecting industry with engineering students and creating real world projects for them. And this real world projects is quite a common theme throughout the different things that I do. I'm also really passionate about getting more girls and diversity into engineering. And so I'm an advisor to Power of Engineering, which is a not-for-profit that I co-founded about 10 years ago, which encourages students into engineering. And then my other project at the moment is I just launched a new business last year in the middle of COVID. I had a baby and launched a business at the same time. It was a pretty full-on year, and we are really passionate about inspiring and training the next generation of leaders with practical experiences, so immersive experiences where they're getting the tools that they need for the modern workplace.
Incredible. I don't know where to start. I want to talk about leadership with you as well, actually, I remembered. But let's start with STEM. So I know you go into schools, so tell me what inspired you to kind of go into schools and start that kind of,
Yeah, well, I'd never heard of engineering before, and my mum studied art. My dad did journalism, so there's no engineers really in my family. I had no idea what it was. And my year 12 physics teacher, Mr. Adamson, said maybe I should consider engineering. And when he first said that, I thought, I think engineers do maths all day. I don't really like maths. I really loved art. I loved physics. I loved history. I thought, how can I combine all these things together in a career? Yeah. And I thought you also had to be really smart to be an engineer.
Yeah.
And I was kind of an average student at school. I got a C in physics in year 12. And I thought, that just wasn't the thing for me because I wasn't this pure math science person. But that kind of sparked a curiosity in me. And I ended up in engineering at university. I actually put it as my fifth preference, but got into it anyway because arts and science, my marks weren't good enough to get into degrees. Wow. And that really sort of started that, the passion for engineering. And I love that engineers get to build the world around us and make things happen. And I just fell in love with it and just thought, this is so cool. So many more people need to hear about this. And I think there's a lot of misperceptions for young people around what engineering is, or they've never heard of it. And so I thought, well, if my teacher can inspire me, maybe I could do something to inspire the next generation. So that's when we started running the one-day events for school kids to find out about what engineering is.
Yeah, and what are you finding when you go in and do those one-day workshops?
It really surprised me because I have to say I am not an educator. I feel like I've gone into education now because I've done it now for the last 10 years. But at the time I thought, I'm a female engineer. Well, I'm just going to figure it out. It was like a problem for me to solve. So I guess I used that engineering mindset to solve this problem. And I went actually back to my old university lecturer, Les Dawes, at QT in Brisbane, because I knew that he'd done work with school students. So it was a real team effort, and we used people who had, got people on board who had this experience. So we did hands-on workshops, site tours, and the students hear from speakers. So they're actually getting their own personal experience of what engineering is because they're participating in these workshops themselves. And they're not doing calculations the whole time. They're actually building a water filter or making a solar farm. And so they're actually getting to see it for themselves. And they're also seeing the real world of engineering when they go on the site tours and interact with engineers. So it's a very immersive and interactive experience.
Wow. And I saw from some of the, research that you did on that work was that you'd go in and students would say, no, there's no way I'm doing engineering. And then you know, by the end of it, they're like, yes.
Yeah. And that really surprised me. The first event was a one-off. We thought, let's see what we can do. Let's see if it works. Let's try it. And at that event, we had more than half of the students change their mind from a no to a yes about engineering careers. And now we pretty consistently find it's about 3/4 of the students that come to the events have that perception shift. And I think that's really exciting that we can have that impact on students in just one day. It's incredible.
And it just takes an idea, you know, it just, as you say, it just makes it visible. Like for you, it wasn't necessarily that you wouldn't, it's just that you just didn't even know engineering existed or what that meant, you know. And as you said, oh, isn't that maths? But it's much more than that. So it's just giving the students this access to, you know, what engineering actually is.
Definitely. And even if they don't go on to pursue engineering, I think it's still really helpful that people have this understanding of the role that engineers play in society and that way of thinking. Someone might study engineering but not go into, say, doing the structural design or detailed mechanical engineering. They might use that mindset to work in a business and to solve problems. And so that kind of problem-solving approach and engineering thinking is so helpful, I think, for careers today and the careers of the future as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as you say, that even if you don't go into engineering, you know, so I think one of the issues I have with the way secondary schools are structured, and same with universities really, is that this kind of silo approach, you know, and that you are this sort of student and you love this subject, and subjects are taught in these kind of silos. And same with university, whereas as you're pointing to, the skills in engineering could come into any degree, and just like all subjects, right? We need kind of like these tastes of everything to really understand what it is, you know, to be human, or what it is to, you know, really succeed in whatever career we want to succeed in.
Definitely. And there's so many myths about engineering. I love that you've talked about the human approach there, because at the end of the day, engineers are designing things for people. And that was a real aha moment for me in my second year of uni, where we were designing a road for a housing estate. And I learned that if you did roads that were wide and straight, people would speed, because it was this kind of, you know, perception that the road, you had all this space, where if you, even if you had the same actual physical road space, but put the line marking more narrow, people would feel like the road was more narrow, and so they'd drive slower. And there was this amazing connection between psychology and engineering. And I think as engineers, we're thinking about how do we make this useful for people. So there's so many blends into other disciplines, even the creative side of things. You've got to creatively think of solutions. So I feel like engineering has it all, but of course I'm totally biased.
Yeah, that's okay. You're allowed to be. And so what did you find at university? Did you, because you talk about wanting to increase diversity and female participation. So when you went to university, did you find, were you the only female, or what?
It was a really funny experience. I'll never forget my first lecture that I walked into. I was about 10 minutes late, and I went to an all-girls school. We were told not to talk to boys, don't talk to boys on the train, you go to and from school. It was a good Catholic girls' school in Brisbane. And so I opened the doors to this room full of people. The lecturer was talking. It was a really old school room. I had to walk across the front of the room, and then the stairs were in the middle. It was a bad design. I had to walk up in front of everybody, and I was so embarrassed. And I remember sitting at the back counting the number of women, because I'd heard there weren't that many women, but I just didn't realize how low it was going to be. Physics was a really normal thing for me to do at school. We had 2 physics classes, so nearly 60 girls doing physics. And in the room there was 12 women out of a class of 120. So it was a big shock to go into a room like that, and I really wasn't expecting it. And for me personally, I found that really challenging, because I felt really out of place. I already felt like I wasn't smart enough to be there, because I wasn't the pure maths and science class person. So for me, it was actually quite intimidating to begin with. Yeah.
And then how did you go? So is there a dropout rate then for the women engineers as well?
I think it's slightly higher. I'd have to check what the latest stats are, but there's a really interesting point. Often it gets missed, because the census data looks at enrolment and then maybe at second year. But if you drop out before, I think the census cutoff date in that first 6 weeks, it's actually not registered in terms of through. And I think a lot of women actually drop out in that first 6 weeks of university. So yeah, it's pretty, for me, there was 8 women who finished in my class at the end. And so there was a dropout rate of a few in the civil engineering program.
Yeah, right. And then what kept you there then? Did you, you know, because that would be very intimidating. So what kept you going? Was there And how were the boys with you? Were they surprised you were there, or were they supportive, or a bit of both?
I think what kept me going was what I would do with the degree at the end. So in my first year, I actually failed maths. I failed materials engineering. I dropped a subject. So I was actually quite behind in my first 3 semesters. I only managed to complete 3 subjects. So I think when I had that moment around that engineers design things for people, I went, oh, this is really cool. And I could see this light at the end of the tunnel. I could see why I was doing that. And this is a message I give to so many students, is if you can understand the why behind something, that's what motivates you. So I ended up having to do 5 subjects a semester for 3 semesters. And I had to sit down with the head of school and convince him that I would be able to pass my 5 subjects, because he said, you don't have a very good track record here. So I'm really grateful that he accepted my argument to do 5 subjects. I needed his permission. So that kind of vision of what I could do at the end kept me going. But I actually personally found it quite difficult with hanging out with the guys, because you got to kind of fit in, right? Well, this is my perspective. And often with engineering, you're doing group projects. The content is very challenging, and you rely on your peers to get a lot of the work done. So I guess in some ways it was helpful, because it taught me around building relationships and social interaction. How do you get people on board and, you know, get along with them? But a lot of the time it was people would pay, you know, pay you out, or tease you a bit, and you had to kind of give it back. And I really didn't like that, but I did kind of go into that culture with the blokes around me, just because I felt like that's the path of least resistance. If I can get along with them, then perhaps it'll be easier to work together as a team. But, you know, looking back, I didn't really have any other ways to deal with those situations. You know, I was like 17, 18 years old in my first year of uni, and so it was quite difficult for me to do that. And it wasn't until my 4th year of uni where I felt like, okay, I can do this on my own, screw what everyone else thinks, just do my, and I actually got better marks, which is quite funny that when I was actually doing it on my own, being more independent. But I found it quite difficult at university, actually. And that the boys would say some pretty nasty things, actually, which I will not repeat here, because I would swear a lot about what they said to me. And so it was quite disheartening. I really felt like I shouldn't be in a lot of those classes.
So I'm starting to think, so you went to an all-girls Catholic school, and so did I, and I think there's something in that all-girl culture where you do see, I mean, even I did kind of the traditional subjects anyway, like English and arts, but you know, I was very inspired by the other, you know, girls in my school who, you know, really did push that girls can do anything, you know, maths and physics and all that. So I'm wondering, in your experience going to co-ed schools, is there less female participation in the STEM subjects? Or I just thought of that as you were talking. I was like, wow, I wonder whether you'd get 60 females in a co-ed, you know, classroom doing STEM.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. One is we really need to have conversations with teachers around the kinds of people that they bring to these events. So we do a lot of work in regional areas. Half our events are in regional locations, which I think is really important. And we've often said to teachers, you know, bring students to find out about engineering. And they've said, well, I asked the class and no one wants to come. They said they weren't interested in engineering. And so I think the first piece there is how educating teachers if they might not know what engineering is, or you actually share about it in a way that makes people think, maybe I could try that. So it's like talking about things as engineers as being creative, adaptable, organized, you know, solving problems, rather than like, you're going to build a bridge or you're going to get on a construction site. So the first piece is really explaining engineering in a way that can be relatable for students. And then the other part is when we do go it's fascinating. I haven't done the research myself on this, but when we work with groups of students, even I remember working with some year 6 students at a school in Geelong where we were doing a hands-on activity. We put out all the different pieces of materials on the table, and before I'd even started the session, the boys had chopped up all the pipe cleaners, ripped off all the fur off them, pulled apart all the pegs, and had just destroyed everything on the table. And I thought, what are they doing? And we do find anecdotally that often the boys can take over and take a lot of ownership in the activity. So there are some ways we get around that. We do girl-only grouping, so we have the girls in one group and the boys in another group. Or we assign roles. So we say to a student, you're going to be doing this task today, or you're going to be documenting, you're going to be planning, you're going to be putting these parts together. So then it means that people can actively participate in different roles. But yeah, it's just fascinating to see that even from such a young age, there's these stereotypes that come out. And I don't know whether the whole nature nurture thing, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, it is. It's like I'm thinking of my sons actually. So I've got 2 sons, and I could just, yep, that would be like that. But I think it's like, it's not necessarily that they knowingly are overtaking from the girls or whatever, but they just would be so interested in all the materials that they would get. So I wonder whether is it also a kind of do we raise girls with less exposure to just even like playing with materials and getting their hands dirty, so there's a kind of hesitancy there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I love playing with like building things and making things, and I was just sharing with someone yesterday that we used to make a billy cart at home and race it down the driveway, and I was with my dad, and there's kind of things that I look back on that go, oh, that was probably an engineering thing to do, but I didn't have the language for it. And so often I think we don't have the language to describe with young kids that they are doing engineering. If you're solving a problem, if you're creating something, well, there's a lot of engineering behind that. And I think that's a general, in society, we don't use that kind of language or share about that with young people. And I think certainly the language we share with young, even, very early on, really impacts our kids and their futures.
And I think one of the things I find is that we really do need to get better at educators in exposing children from a really young age about the different career options that they have, because at them, what young students are, so people go to what they see. And so as a primary school age student, who are the people that you're seeing? Well, you're seeing your teachers, you're seeing nurses and doctors, you're seeing the kind of service professions like police and fire engines. And so it's not unusual then that when you ask a young child, what do you want to be? It is things like, doctor, it is teacher. And then because students are taught by teachers who have chosen teaching as a career, their exposure to what other careers are out there is limited. And so we really need people like yourself to kind of come in and disrupt that and say, hey, these are these other careers out there. Don't kind of put yourself into such a box so early.
Definitely. And it's really tricky with engineering. There's 35 different types of engineering listed on the our website. I'm a civil engineer, and I couldn't tell you what a food engineer does or really an electrical engineer, because it's just so different. So it's really actually difficult to explain all of those different careers. And I often hear from schools that if a student asks, what can I use maths for when I finish, they'll say something like, you can be a maths teacher. And
I know.
Think, oh my gosh, there's so many amazing things that you can do besides that. It's that world that they've got. But then isn't it funny that we then have such a shortage of science and maths teachers as well? Like it's a real problem that at our institution, we've had to cut or, modify the science teaching degree because there's not enough students. So it's tragic really that we do not have good science and maths teachers as well. So it's not even that we want them. We do need teachers as well as being exposed to all those other careers as well. Definitely. And the stats are pretty scary when you look at it. I think it's something around 40% of maths teachers in high school haven't been trained as maths teachers. And so I think that becomes part of the problem. If it's something that you're not passionate about or you don't really care about, and then you're going to teach that material, there's kind of, meeting the basic requirements. And then if you're not excited about it, then of course it's tricky to get kids excited. So I think it kind of perpetuates that problem.
But you've managed to really forge a really kind of such a diverse career in terms of engineering, and it'd be great to hear about some of your other projects that you do with STEM, because I know, just taking a peek at your LinkedIn profile, it's like wow, there's this one and this one. How do I even introduce you? Which organisation will I bring up?
Yes, I think this is the modern career path of doing a whole range of different things. And I did actually start out in a really traditional engineering career path. I was a structural engineer for a couple of years. It was my first role out of university. While I was at uni, I got to work on a construction site and was a site engineer, which was super fun, getting on the steel cap boots and walking around site and making decisions with, you know, these big tall blokes looking at me. I'm not a very tall person, so it was a really cool experience. And then I actually got made redundant from my job as a structural engineer, which was really good because I probably would have like survived it and stuck it out because I thought that's what engineers should do. And I ended up getting a role as a project manager at Brisbane City Council, and they said, this guy's leaving in 2 weeks, you're getting all these projects. So then I ended up with over $20 million of projects that I was managing. 23 years old. Wow. I thought, what am I doing here? And thankfully I had an amazing manager who gave me just, you know, a bit of a stretch, but also really supported me. And 6 months later, I was managing $45 million worth of projects. And I really saw in that role that engineers, you know, I had to communicate with the community. I had to communicate with the design team. There was a whole range of people I had to get on board with the project and work through different things. So that was a really great experience and kind of set my career path more into the infrastructure space. So I like to say, if you've driven on a road in Brisbane, Sydney or Melbourne, you've probably driven on a road that I've helped build or maintain, which I think is a pretty cool impact to have.
Yeah, that's amazing. And keep going. I know there's more. What are the other? Go.
Yeah. So while I was working, and I think this problem came up for me, was that I just kept going to meetings and I was the only woman, and it just became really frustrating for me. So while I was at Brisbane City Council, I thought, you know, I was the only woman in the team, and you know, it was just very like frustrating actually. And my husband says I turned my anger into something for good. Otherwise, I think I was an angry person about it. And so that's when we did our first event for girls to find out about engineering back in 2011. And I had my day job as an engineer, and then I had this on the side. And I think that really helped me because I felt a lot at work. I had to be this like engineer person. I didn't have a lot of freedom to be myself or try things or experiment. And so through starting the events and then turning that into a not-for-profit, I really got to express myself and discover my leadership. And that was an amazing experience for me because I could take risks, particularly in engineering. You don't want to take too many risks because you literally don't want your buildings to fall down, right? Like that's not a good outcome. And so I think sometimes that culture is inherently there within the engineering profession, that you personally don't want to take risks in your career. I was like scared to talk to clients and things like that because you wanted to do a good job. So this side hustle helped me really explore that. And then I went down to 4 days a week and did this on the side. I started another business, which is actually a maths textbook. So me and my two business partners and some educators rewrote the maths textbook for year 9 and 10 and made all real world examples in it because we wanted to get it into the classroom every day. So yeah, I quit my job at an engineering company to work on that full time. And it was great to learn about business and all kinds of different things in the ed tech world. And I think it really deepened my education experience. Then I went back into engineering, worked on the Westgate Tunnel project and still had these projects on the side, and then went to Swinburne University. And this that was a role which is now I can connect the dots looking back because I work with industry. I talk to them like I would as a consultant engineer. I put together projects and then I partner with educators to then turn them into learning products for our students. So it's this perfect combination of the education part, the engineering, and it was not a role that I'd ever heard of or expected or predicted, and I didn't even know it existed until I was in it. So it's been really cool to be able to combine all these.
So did you create that role, or was it something that
I did actually. So I got approached we're running the STEM Academy, and the leader of that approached me and said, we're looking for people. And so I had this incredible opportunity to sit down with him, interview the team and just see what they needed, and said, well, here's what I can do. And I feel like it was the first time where I really felt confident in here are my skills and here's what I can offer and here's what I can't do, and then design this engineer in residence role. And it worked out really amazingly well. So I still have the side projects, and then I've got the day job, and now I've got this new organisation around leadership. I've stepped back from the not-for-profit where I'm on our advisory committee, and I think that's really healthy as well to have a whole new team of leaders with fresh ideas, and I think that really shows sustainability of the organisation if you can get new people running it, and so it's not just me. I think that's a really, really healthy thing, so I can go do other things.
so incredible. So many questions I have. I want to go back to this first one that I thought of when you were talking about being the only female in, you know, in the meetings. And because this is another thing I've been thinking about, is how did you have to adjust how you presented yourself as a female? Did you find you had to, yeah.
I feel so embarrassed thinking about some of the things I would have done back then, but even things like I lowered my voice. Yeah, and right. My colleague, you know, so funny thinking about it. You have a comment from a colleague going, do you know you go up at the end of every sentence? And I was like, oh, okay. And then I interpret that as, you know, however I interpreted that. And yeah, I actually spent 2 years doing voice coaching because I also speak publicly, and I was actually like deepening my voice.
Okay, we had a bit of a technical hitch, but we're going to keep going. Okay, go.
Yeah, so I just lower my voice in meetings because I wanted to sound more authoritative. And yes, I've done voice coaching now and increased my resonance because I am a small framed person, and yeah, being really owned who I am and my voice. And that was a big lesson for me. And I noticed in the meetings I would rightly or wrongly think I'm going to say something silly, and people are going to remember that I said something that was a bit stupid because I'm the only woman, so I was really self-conscious. So I used to want to do everything perfectly. I would work really hard to know all the answers to all the technical problems. So in some ways you could say that's a good thing because I was really, you know, excelling at my job, but I also found it quite frustrating that I felt like I had to do all these extra things just to kind of be in my role. And I think as time went on, I really understood my value and how I was different, and like I'm a good communicator or all those different things. And I think understanding those different nuances with people actually helped me in my role and has been a strength. But I think I wish I really understood my strengths earlier rather than trying to compensate and try to be like everybody else and just kind of be stuck in that whole world.
I know it's hard, isn't it, to know, you know, is this threat real or is it just in my head? And yeah, definitely learning to just perform anyway, you know, say what I want to say anyway, and not be so held back from, you know, because you don't have any control over what other people are thinking in that room, and, you know, so you might as well say what you want to say, you know.
And now I have a 1-year-old, I'm like, good enough is completely fine.
Oh yes, there's nothing like children to realise what is important, and yeah,
that's right.
You completely just smash your self-confidence as well. It's like, I got this, and then yeah,
100%.
I don't know, that was mine. So the other thing that would be great to talk about is leadership, and particularly young leaders, and how we can, you know, support them, because I think, you know, teachers are, by recognition of the fact that they're standing in front of the classroom, or, you know, they are leaders of learning in that environment, and often because there's such a huge dropout of teachers, you know, within the first 5 years or something, 30% of teachers drop out of the career. I think that, you know, you have a lot of young leaders as well taking over role. So what are the things that you've discovered about how we can support leaders, or how, you know, how you can support yourself as a leader, take that leadership role on, and also, you know, how can we set up the environment to support, you know, young leaders?
Great question. Yeah, I think first of all, leadership starts with you, and we talk about that a lot in our leadership programs. You've got to fit your own oxygen mask first before you can go for other people's. And I think leading yourself is a real foundation for leadership. And so we talk about looking at it from an inwards perspective. So first, so that's, what are your strengths? What are your blind spots? What are your false beliefs? What's holding you back as a leader, but also what motivates you and what inspires you. So having that inward understanding and self-awareness is really important. And then looking at the outward view. So what are your goals? What's your vision? What are your values? Because if you're not clear on your goals and you're not sharing that with people, then they can't help you as well achieve them. So I think it's important for you to share with your team what your goals are and where you want to go, because if you don't have that, then you're kind of rudderless. You're not really, you know, no one's really sure of where you're going. And the third piece is the ongoing view. So what are those habits and mindsets and practices that you put in place ongoingly? So when you're looking inwardly, one thing we talk about is like your dead weight. So is it your tax returns you haven't done? Is it like, I've got a bill actually sitting right here? Is it a bill that you haven't paid? Are there things on your mind that you might be in a meeting and someone might mention it and then you think, oh my gosh, I haven't done that either. And then your brain gets totally distracted.
Yeah.
And those bills are going to come up. Tax returns are going to come up every year. So you need to maintain that as a habit ongoingly to kind of review that and see what comes up. So for me personally, I have a morning routine where I journal, I do some reflection. It might just be breathing. Certainly having a 1-year-old has impacted my mind.
Yeah, maybe needed to change a few,
that's
or
right.
maybe shorter.
Yeah, that's it. Exercise, that kind of thing. So those habits. So it really starts with leading yourself first. And I think if you're someone who is going into a leadership role, looking at who are the people that can support you and what's your environment like, and having sponsors is really, really powerful. I've had so many mentors along the way, and people, even just one saying, I think this one-off event could be a national organization. And when she said that, I thought, this woman is crazy. I've never led anything in my life. How would I know how to do that? But she was the managing director of a company. She was on the board of the Reserve Bank of Australia. I thought, well, I guess she knows more than me. So I'm going to listen to what she said rather than listen to what I have to say. So I think having those people that can believe in you can make a really big difference, and kind of be there to support you when you fall or before you fall.
Do you find that were they easy to find for you, mentors, or did you have to go out and source them yourself?
I think it was one of those, like, it starts with one thing and it just leads to so many others. So the first event that we had for Power of Engineering, I met so many people. I met like the Dean of Engineering at the time, and it was kind of like hey, have you seen what's going on down the engineering building? You should go check it out. So that day I met a lot of people, and I will talk to anyone who will listen about this idea around getting more people into engineering. And so I think because I was just sharing so much, people would introduce me or go, you should talk to this person. And I think that made it a lot easier. And that mentor that I just mentioned, who's on the Reserve Bank, I met her because I was sharing with one of my coaches, actually. His flatmate was an engineer, and I just said, we did this event. And he said, I think our managing director would be interested. I should introduce you. And he was a grad. And I thought, oh my God, a grad sending like basically the CEO an email. She is not going to care about little old me with my little event. And this dude is a grad. But he, true to his word, he did. Sent this massive email after our chat. I didn't prompt him on anything. He just sent it. And she said, sure, let's meet for an hour. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's cool. So I did. I brought a friend with me because I was scared going to and it was really, really powerful. And I asked her, could you review our business plan, and we'd love to stay in touch. And I sent her an email this week, and we're still in touch, nearly 10 years later. And she's just been amazing. She introduced us to our investor for our EdTech business. We got a 5-year funding agreement from Qantas because of an introduction she made. And it just kind of compounds, I think, once you are really like genuinely passionate and genuinely sharing your ideas, but also following through with action. I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of people talk about stuff, and my mentors have said time and time again, you're someone who actually does something. And I am surprised that people don't do that follow through, and that would be my tip if you want to get that support, actually follow through with action.
Yeah. Do you think, what stops people, do you think, from following through? Is it something internal that will stop them from?
I think a lot of it is that fear of failure, fear of looking bad. And I don't think we as a society do enough to train young people in that resilience. And I was actually just at the Independent Schools Forum a couple of weeks ago speaking with principals, and the question came up, what's the biggest challenge in your school? And the principal sitting next to me, she said, it's that parents don't want their child to fail. They're okay for other children to fail, but not their child. And I went, really? And the MC of the day, also a principal, said, Felicity, I'm sure you have a different view. And I just presented at the conference about leadership and this experiment mindset. And, engineering, we learn through failure and making mistakes and we don't let it fail. We keep going to the end. And I said, me and my husband talk about, we want our son to fail and have those experiences and build that resilience. But I think it's a real challenge with not just in education, but I think in our society and with parents today. Yeah.
Would you believe that I, as an academic, get phone calls from parents if their students fail? They're adults, Felicity.
Oh my
God. Parents are calling me.
I can't believe that. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah.
And it's just getting more and more. And I mean, I love my students so much. I really, really do. But there is definitely a lack of responsibility about if they're not going that well. There's a resistance to actually looking at themselves to say, okay, how could I have managed this situation better? So particularly in terms of their, like when my students are out on prac and they have their relationship with their student teacher, their supervising teacher, if they're not getting the feedback that they want or in the style that they want, there's that kind of resistance. There's a demand that things should go a certain way, rather than having a kind of that sort of failure mindset of, well, let me get, oh, it's okay, I'm failing, great, give me the feedback, how can I do better? That right, it's just always like they're wrong and I'm right. Not for all students, but there is a definite lack of, that's how I would describe it, like responsibility about, okay, well, what can I do to make it better? And I wonder whether that's a lack of realization of their own leadership.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's something I continue to ponder because it comes up again and again. And my husband and I have started multiple businesses together, and he's had some really big failures where he had to liquidate the company. With our edtech business, we actually found it so hard to get into schools. The solution was easy. We wrote the textbook, but then actually creating change in education, so hard. We had no idea. It would take sort of like...
Tell me about it.
Oh my gosh. I'm like, it's like a person, like, if I'm going to do anything with my life, I may as well do something really hard and challenging and do something in changing education. And it would take 18 months for a school to actually implement our resources. And so for me, there's a failure in a few areas there. And for me, I looked at like, well, what did I learn from those experiences? And I've learned so much. And I think at the end of the day, it's who you're going to be about that. You might get negative feedback or feedback that's not what you want, but you always get to choose who you can be in those situations. I think if we focus on that, and Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck and Grit by Angela Duckworth are two of my favorite books. And I think about, what would Carol say? It's a learning opportunity, and take that mindset.
Yeah. And it is about kind of separating yourself from, not saying I'm a failure, but rather, okay, this failed, this failed, and so what can I do next time to have a better outcome?
It's the situation, not the person. And I look back at when I failed in first year, and I was really disappointed. I felt like a total loser. I failed maths and engineering. You think, oh, if you're an engineer, you're going to need maths, and I just failed the first year maths.
Essential subject.
Pretty important. And I think I remember being really embarrassed to tell my parents about it. I can't even remember what they said at the time, but I felt really embarrassed about it. And but I got committed to that outcome, and that really pushed me through. And I think when we think of that big picture of this is the pathway to get where I need to go, then you can always try again. Like I just went and did the class again. Paid myself whatever money I paid, and just went and started the course again.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Oh my gosh, Felicity, I could talk to you forever. I just, really appreciate your commitment to STEM in education and what you're out to achieve. It's just amazing. And I'm sure that there are thousands of women out there who have taken on a STEM career because of, what you've brought to them in the classroom. So thank you for your stand and your continual contribution to education. And let's continue this little partnership. I think we could help each other out a little bit too, Felicity.
I can help in any way I can. I'm very passionate about it, and I think it's such an important topic, and engineers have such a big impact on the world, and I think we need to, STEM just gives you such a great way to think, and I think that's the the really cool thing that we could do in education is teaching people to think rather than just like answering quizzes and that kind of thing. And I'd love to see education move more in that way. So I could talk to you for hours as well. There's so many.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Have to do part one. Let's call this part one. All right. Thank you, Felicity. This has been another episode of Teaching Heroes, and we'll see you all next week for another episode. Bye.